Daniel and chapter number 6 together for our time in the Word of God over the next few minutes. We hope to be able to kind of pull back the lesson that the Lord has for us in this passage. And we've been on Wednesday evenings talking about this incredible gift, the gift of prayer. And we've spent the last, 4 or 5 weeks or so kind of uncovering this powerful gift of prayer. Daniel chapter number 6. Now, I need to catch you up in the story of Daniel chapter number 6. Okay, so I'm going to try to catch you up with where we're at, and then we'll look at what is taking place in front of us, and then by God's grace, we'll make a couple applications, and we'll be challenged in our lives together, and then we'll go for the night. All right, so Daniel and chapter number 6, and here's what's happening in chapter 6. Ready? Daniel is in captivity. All right, now you're caught up. Daniel chapter number 6. All right, Daniel is in captivity. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. He came in. Israel had disobeyed God, and as a result of their disobedience, God allowed another nation to rise to power, and that nation we know as Babylon, and they've come in under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, and Israel was destroyed. The best of the best were kept alive. So the smartest, the wisest, the valuable, the beautiful, they were all kept alive. Needless to say, all of us then would have been killed. Nobody in here would have been saved had we been alive back then. But the best were kept alive. Daniel is among that list. He's obviously very bright, which we'll see here in a moment. And so the best are kept alive. And it's a good chance that Daniel probably watched his family murdered in front of him. Historians will tell you that Daniel was maybe middle school, so 6th, 7th, 8th grade probably at the time. And so Daniel then does his growing up in Babylon. Daniel at this point in chapter number 6 is an old man. He is a grown old man. He's probably 60, 70, maybe 80 years old when the events of chapter number 6 take place. Nebuchadnezzar is off the scene, and there is another king named Darius. Verse number 1. That's where we're at. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was the first, that the princes might give account to them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and the princes, because of an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Okay, so time out. Daniel is like the top 3 of the rulers, and of these top 3 rulers, Daniel is preferred over all of them. So the king listens to him more than he listens to anyone else. And you say, well, why? Why does he listen to Daniel more than he listens to anyone else? And it's verse number 3. Did you see it? Because an excellent spirit. Oh, no, that's a challenge, isn't it? That's a challenge, isn't it? Well, why did the king listen to Daniel more than he listened to anybody else? Because Daniel had an excellent spirit. Daniel was distinguished in his spirit. I wonder if it could be said of you, and if it could be said of me in our place of business, in our place of work, in our home, with our friends, among our family, or even, yes, even here at church. You know what? They have an excellent spirit. There's something about her spirit that is excellent. Oh, what a rebuke. What a challenge, right? That's not the sermon, but I thought I'd give you that for free, as us preachers say. All right, verse number 4. Then the president and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel. Okay, so they obviously don't like him because the king prefers him above them. And so they set out to say, we got to find a reason to not like Daniel. How many of you know some people, you just can't make them happy for anything, right? Some people are looking for anything to be upset about, and that's these guys. They're threatened by Daniel. They're threatened by the influence that Daniel has. They clearly don't have the same spirit that Daniel has, and so they say, we need to find something on him. We got to find a way to just blacklist him. That's what they want. We'll find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault. Let's find a reason to get Daniel out of the position of influence he has. But they could not find one. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Okay, so they're immediate. The reason they do not like Daniel is because Daniel is preferred above them. He's distinguished in his spirit. But Daniel also is diligent in his work. They looked and they looked and they looked, and yet what do we find? He was faithful. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Would to God that we would be this kind of a man or this kind of a woman. That we were faithful, that we were diligent in what God has given you or in what God has given me to do. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. We shall not find any occasion against Daniel, except we find it in him concerning, or find it against him concerning the law of his God. Which is to say, listen, if we're going to get anything on Daniel, it's only going to be as it relates to his relationship with God. It's pretty good when all they have against you is how much you love your God. It's pretty good when the only thing they can hold over your head is your faithfulness to God. And this is a testimony of the discipline that Daniel possessed. Now listen, I understand that, this is 2016, and we shouldn't use words like discipline in the church, but there is a measure of Christianity in which we need to practice a discipline. That if we're going to grow, if we're going to thrive, if we're going to advance, then there needs to be a discipline in our lives. That's what Daniel has. Daniel is disciplined, whether he wanted to or didn't, whether he felt like it or not. I'm sure over all the years between the ages of 8 to 80, there were probably some days where Daniel didn't feel like doing right, and yet he did right anyway, and he was marked by his diligence and by his discipline to do what was right, no matter the cost, no matter the situation. Well, you can be quiet if you want, and then we'll just move on, all right? Verse number 6. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and they said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom and the governors and the princes and the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Okay, so let me help you understand what just happened. They all come to him and they say, listen, King Darius, we have decided that as a tribute to you, because you are so wonderful and because we want you to live forever. So we have decided as a tribute to you, because you deserve this, that no one else should pray to any other god for the next 30 days except to pray to you, because you alone are sufficient to meet anyone else's need and to meet everyone else's need. So they come to him and they manipulate him, and they come to him and they lie to him, right? Because here's what they say: all the presidents of the kingdom and the governors and the princes and the counselors and the captains have consulted together. And we are all in favor of making this law. And since it's all of us, we can't all be wrong. You should be very careful when someone approaches you and says, look, I've talked to a lot of people, and there's a lot of us, and what we think is, surely there's no way that all of us can be wrong. Yeah, there is. Just because the majority does it doesn't mean it's right. Just because everyone else does doesn't mean you should. Just because it's popular doesn't mean it's right. This is what they approach. We've all talked about it. There's no way that all of us can be wrong. And so Darius is manipulated, and he's lied to. Verse 8, now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore, King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Okay, so now the law is passed. You cannot pray to any other god for 30 days. Except to Darius. And if you pray to any other god other than Darius for the next 30 days, then you shall be thrown into prison. And the reason this law is passed is because there's a group of people that don't like Daniel. No matter what Daniel does, they're not going to like him because Daniel has more influence than they do. And they know that the only way that they can find anything against Daniel is to find it as it relates to Daniel's relationship with God. Okay, are we there now? Everybody with me? Verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber toward Jerusalem, kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. And these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near, and they spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the lion's den? You remember what you said that one time when you said? That's how that sounds. You remember that one time when you said? How many of you, your kids, they remember every word you've ever said? No, Dad, you said. Okay, fine. You said we're getting ice cream. Okay, fine, I'll get you ice cream, you know. My kids, they never forget anything like that. And the king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which shall not be altered. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee. Well, Daniel didn't do what he was supposed to do, O king. But he maketh petitions 3 times a day. Verse 14 is where we are. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself. That's like, what did I just do? Moment. What did I just do? And he set in his heart, and he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. So the king says, I've got to find a way to change it. Obviously, there's no way to change it. That's verse 15. Verse 16, then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel, and they cast him into the lion's den. And now the king spake unto Daniel, and he said, thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. Lots of lessons, but just one as it relates to prayer this evening. For prayer to become an involuntary action, it must first be an intentional routine. For prayer to become an involuntary reaction, it must first be an intentional routine. This is true of prayer, but not just of prayer, but we're having a conversation tonight about prayer. No one drifts toward the right and toward the good and toward the holy and toward God. No one drifts, spiritually speaking, toward the good. When we drift, spiritually speaking, we always drift away from God. We don't drift toward God. No man doeth good. No, not one. No one naturally, in and of themselves, without intention, without discipline, without work, no one naturally moves in their relationship toward God. We naturally move away from God. No one naturally moves toward God. Most prayer is not done because most prayer isn't planned to be done. Most prayer is not done because most prayer isn't planned to be done. Okay, so here's what happens in my life as it relates to me. And I don't know how it works for you. But man, tomorrow morning, I really want to wake up and spend some time in prayer before I tackle my day. I mean, I really want to spend time in prayer, and that is my genuine heart. And I believe that's probably your heart tonight. You genuinely want to spend some time with God in prayer. We all know we should. No one has to be talked into it. We all know it's important. We all know God asks us to. We all know it's valuable. But for me, it'll be difficult tomorrow morning. Because I'm probably going to stay up late tonight and I'm going to have a bowl of ice cream. I'm going to catch up on some Netflix that I've missed. Maybe to catch the end of the baseball game or the basketball game. I'll probably have to watch some show like House Hunters or something like that with my wife. I'll get into bed really late, probably, later than I intend. I'll get into bed late. I'll set my alarm and I'll say, okay, you know what? Tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up and I'm going to spend some time in prayer before I hit the day. And then my alarm is going to go off at about 5:30. And then something's going to take over. And it's going to reach over. And it's going to hit the snooze. Thank God for snooze. What a gift. The snooze button is a gift from God. I'm going to hit snooze and go, yes, 10 more minutes, like that's going to change anything. Yes, 10 more minutes of sleep. And I'm going to roll over, then it's going to go off 10 minutes later. I'm going to hit snooze again, and then 10 minutes, and snooze again, and then snooze again, until Amanda comes in and says, David, the kids are in the truck waiting for you. Go! And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to run and I'm going to get in the truck. And I'm like, man, I really wanted to pray. Like, I mean, everything within me wants to spend some time tomorrow morning praying. But, you know, if you don't plan, you won't do it. For prayer to become an involuntary reaction in your life, it must first be an intentional, a part of your intentional routine. Let me help you understand it another way. It's called muscle memory, right? Muscle memory. Now, I don't have a lot of muscle, but I have a decent memory, right? What do we mean? When we say things like muscle memory, what do we mean? We say things like, well, your body just does what you've taught your body to do. That's why, how many of you, it's been a while since you jumped on a bike, right? But if we rolled a bike down the aisle this morning, I said, hey, or this evening, I said, hey, I have $100 for the first person who jumps on this bike and rides it around the auditorium. We'd all be pushing and shoving to jump on the bike. And it might be 10 years since you've been on a bike, but chances are for $100, you could get on that bike and you could ride it around this auditorium and you could go pretty fast too. You might even get to the back and go, look, no hands. I mean, you might even be able to do that across the back. And when you jump on that bike, you will know what'll happen. Your muscles will take over, and what will you do? You'll ride the bike. I mean, it might be wobbly at first, but eventually you'll get it down. Why? Because you've taught your body that. If you've learned to ride a bike at all, you've taught your body that, right? Your muscles take over, and it will ride the bike. Why? Because when you get in that position on that bike, your body takes over, does what it does. The same is true in your spiritual life. The same thing is true in your spiritual life. Let me show you how it relates to Daniel. Sometimes when you read this passage, you get the impression that Daniel is being rebellious. That Daniel is being defiant. That Daniel is being obstinate. That what Daniel is doing is he is showing that there is nobody that's going to tell him what to do. And there's nobody that's going to boss him around. And bless God, I'm going to do this no matter what. That's kind of like when you read the passage, and sometimes when preachers preach on this passage, that's the flavor that they kind of bring to the table. Like, don't let anybody tell you when you can or can't do. But that's not anywhere in the life of Daniel. You remember when Daniel was first brought into the kingdom? Maybe you don't, but it's chapter number 1. When Daniel was first brought into the kingdom, they set in front of Daniel food that was offered to false idols, and that was against the laws of Jewish custom, to eat food that had been offered to a false god or to a false idol. And so Daniel, as a young man, approaches the individual that was in charge of them, their keeper, he's called. And he approaches him and he says, listen, look, I'm not trying to cause a stink and I'm not trying to do anything, but I have a religious belief against eating food that's been offered to the false idols. And the keeper says to Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he says to them, well, listen, if you don't eat this food, the king, he isn't going to be happy with you. And it's going to be my head that goes rolling if you don't eat some steak. Because you're going to be weak and you're going to be sickly. And so you need to eat this diet because we know that this is a diet that works. And Daniel says, well, let's put it to the test. And if you will be as kind as to let us eat what is rightfully and what is religiously in view with what we believe, you let us eat that for a set amount of time, and your men can eat what you put in front of them for a set amount of time, and then let's have a comparison and see who's more healthy, us or them. Aren't you glad we're not doing that tonight? I am, because I had In-N-Out for lunch. And let's see who is, and if it be so that they are better than us, then we will eat whatever meat you want us to eat. Does that sound like a defiant spirit? Does that sound like a stubborn child to you? Does this sound like a kid who's, I'm not going to eat my green beans? No, that doesn't sound like that at all. What that sounds like is someone who has what the Bible says, an excellent spirit. So this is what I want you to know from Daniel. Prayer for Daniel was not ignorant rebellion. This is not Daniel sticking his heels in as some kind of political insurrectionist. This is not Daniel attempting to lead a coup. This is not Daniel in defiant with his fist up toward the government saying, you can't tell me what to do. I'll do what I want. That's not Daniel's spirit. That's never been Daniel's spirit. And it's sad that that's the way that sometimes Daniel is portrayed. You remember when we were little kids and we were growing up going to Sunday school and they used those things called flannel graph? Flannel graph was so cool. Because you could just put everything up there and take it all down and put it all up there, right? And then flannel graph as a kid always had Daniel like on a balcony. Do you remember the Daniel set? It always had Daniel on a balcony out in the middle of the open, like praying out in the middle of the open, right? But what history will teach you and what commentaries teach you is this, that's actually not the way it was at all. They didn't have huge balconies on their houses, like overlook the lake. Daniel's house would have been government living because that's where he existed. And Daniel's windows would have been very small because there would have been no glass and no bars over the windows. So they made small windows in order so no one could climb in their windows at night and take their stuff or cause harm or wrong. Not huge balconies to display their defiance to the government, but small windows in which they could look out toward the sky and the sun. On top of that, listen to how it reads. And then these men assembled, verse 11, and they found Daniel. They didn't walk casually by Daniel's house and see a defiant rebel praying to God. No, they assembled and they went looking to find Daniel doing what they knew that Daniel would do. Why? Because they knew Daniel's relationship with God. Look at this. Look at verse 10. Look at the end of verse 10. as he did aforetime. If there is a key into understanding Daniel's attitude, that's the key. Daniel did what Daniel had been doing for 80 years. Daniel did what he had been doing since he'd watched his family ripped out of his hands as a young man and since he was marched into Babylon. Daniel was doing what he had been doing for decade after decade after decade. This was second nature. This wasn't some sort of rebellion or defiant spirit. This was who Daniel was. This was the discipline that Daniel had. This is the kind of character and integrity that Daniel lived with. Prayer was not a rebellion. Prayer was an involuntary action. That's the second thing I want you to see. Daniel's prayer was not rebellion. It was an involuntary reaction. This is what Daniel had done. When the crisis hit in Daniel's life, he got on his knees. When the crisis hits in your marriage, it will reveal what you've done aforetime. When the crisis hits in your personal life, all it will do is it will reveal who you already are. Crisis doesn't make you. Crisis doesn't break you. Crisis only reveals what's already there. This event does not make Daniel, and this event does not break Daniel. This event goes, this is who Daniel's been the whole time. It was an involuntary reaction. This is what Daniel had done for decade after decade, after decade, after decade. An involuntary reaction of his life. Your response to crisis reveals a lot about who you really are. Your response to the problems that life brings your way reveals a lot about your spiritual condition. What's the first thing you do when you don't get your way? Because that is who you really are. You know what Daniel's first thing, look at it's the first thing. Here's how you know it's the first thing. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house as he did aforetime. The minute Daniel knew, his immediate response was to do what he had been doing for decades, which was what? Prayer. It was prayer. That's the last one. Prayer is what Daniel did because prayer is what Daniel had done. Prayer is what Daniel did because prayer is what Daniel had done. He made prayer such a part of his life. He made prayer such a part of his routine. It was muscle memory kicking in for Daniel. Not open defiance, not open rebellion, not leading some coup against the establishment. No, this is what Daniel had been doing all along. This is who Daniel was. I would argue that it's probably momentum at this point. You know what I mean when I mean momentum? It's like taking a big rock and putting it on top of a hill and then pushing it. And the rock just starts rolling. You know what I mean? And you don't really have to do anything else with the rock. You don't even have to do anything else with the ball. You just push it, and then the momentum will do the rest. Right? It's like what we saw Brother Michael do a couple weeks ago when he was coming down the steps. How many of you saw Brother Michael like right down? It was just momentum that took him down the steps the rest of the way. Be glad he wasn't on these side steps. That would have been interesting. It was just going to take him down. That's what's happening in Daniel's life. It's just the momentum. Because this had been the habit of his life over and over and over again. I would argue that Daniel had been faithful to pray when he felt like it and when he didn't feel like it. I would argue that there were times when Daniel prayed and he got his request answered, and there were times when Daniel prayed and it felt like he didn't hear a word back. But Daniel still prayed. Daniel responded to the crisis the way that he had been responding to the crisis all along. By the time that this edict would have been passed, Daniel had probably been praying in Babylon this same exact way for 60 years, 70 years. That's a long time to pray, isn't it? I think there's good encouragement for us there, huh? Some of you have been praying about something. This is how we pray. We hear bad news on Monday. God, I got bad news today. Could you please fix it by tomorrow? Or maybe Wednesday, but definitely by the weekend, so I know that you're real. And then you come in the pastor's office, you're like, well, I prayed about it. Really? How long have you been praying about it? Well, I prayed yesterday about it. Right. Daniel, decade after decade after decade after decade. This was just what he'd done. This is just who he was. For prayer to be an involuntary reaction, it must be a part of our intentional routine. I'm going to be honest with you. If I were Daniel and I'd heard of this edict, I would probably have said, look, God, I've been praying for 50, 60, 70 years. I feel like I have some prayer credit stored up. This isn't like a lifelong edict here. This is just like for the next 30 days. And so, God, because I've been praying for, 70 years, I'm going to take a break for the next 30 days, and I'm going to get right back with you. I would have found some sort of justification on why this is not what I had to do. And yet that's not what we find from Daniel, is it? No, we find Daniel doing what he had been doing all along. So let me ask you a question. What is the discipline of your prayer life going to do when the crisis hits? What's the discipline of your prayer life going to do when the crisis hits? They say it takes 21 days to form a habit. That's 21 days of not hitting the snooze button and actually rolling out of bed when we intended to. But I wonder how different your life would look if that's the habit we formed. I wonder how different our responses would be if that's the habit we formed. I wonder how different our spirit would be if that is the habit we formed in our lives. I think there's probably a tie, and I'm out of time tonight, but I think there's probably a tie between Daniel's prayer habits and Daniel's excellent spirit. Had Daniel not aforetime or before, had he not made prayer a part of his life, I highly doubt that he would have had an excellent spirit. Had prayer not been a part of who Daniel was that if that was not the character that Daniel possessed, I think the story would start with, and there was Daniel, one of the top 3 presidents, and he had a critical spirit. It doesn't say that, does it? He has an excellent spirit because he had a good Christian discipline in his life. So here's my question for you. Will you make prayer a habit? I'm not asking you if you want to pray, because I think we all do. We all know we should pray. I think we all genuinely want to pray. I'm asking you, will you put it on your calendar for tomorrow, and will you make prayer a part of your life tomorrow? Maybe not an hour. Maybe not 30 minutes. Let's just start with 5. 5 minutes. Maybe 10 minutes for you. It doesn't matter the time. Would you just do it? Would you make it a habit of your life and let it become who you are, so that when the crisis hits, it'll be involuntary? It'll be involuntary. Let's stand together for prayer, shall we? Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word tonight. We thank you for the example we find from Daniel on prayer. And I pray that you would make us men and women in a church of prayer warriors. That this is second nature. This is the response that we have when crisis hits. We go to you in prayer. When things don't go our way, we go to you in prayer. When we have questions, when we get bad news, we go to you in prayer. Would you create in us an excellent spirit like Daniel had, because of the discipline that we've committed to being like you and following your will for our lives and learning your word? I pray that we would make the decision tonight. God, give us the courage to make the decision tonight, to make prayer a habit in our lives. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. Can I just ask you this? How many of you say, Dave, God spoke to my heart tonight. Maybe